This week we are graciously, so to speak, being given an extra day off, in addition to the usual late May bank holiday, to celebrate Queen Elizabeth II, having been on the British and Commonwealth throne for a full 70 years. For almost my entire life I've been a monarchist, not in a very chauvinistic way, and not even with a great deal of conviction, but as Jordan Peterson might say, in a very low resolution fashion. I've always known that there has never been much, if any, justification of having a queen or a king. The idea, such as it is, has never held much water, because an idea is an intellectual thing, and a monarchy is hardly that. The notion that a single human being, of no real appreciable difference to the rest of us, somehow, without any particular merit, gets to be head of state, is an absurd one. In fact, it's really quite daft. And one of the things that is most daft about the whole ridiculous edifice is that many of us expect, and are expected, to respect the monarch. Why would we do that? As anyone over the age of about 14 knows, respect must be earned. As spoilt and entitled 14-year-olds, we often kicked against this, believing that our elders should respect us. We insisted in our ill-formed and innocent little minds that respect was somehow a two-way street, that being a cosseted teenager was equally as deserving of respect as someone who had kept said teenager alive for over 14 years. But the adult-teenager dynamic is of no real use when discussing the idea of respect for the monarchy. And it is another reason why, ethically, monarchies should not exist. Because we are not children, and the Queen, whatever her undeniable virtues may be, is not our mother. Queen Elizabeth II may have had many trials and tribulations over the years, and particularly recently, but there is no way that she can be said to have endured hardships greater than the overwhelming majority of her subjects in Britain, nor especially in the wider Commonwealth realms of her kingdom. Despite a lifetime of unswerving duty to the institution, the nation, and to the Commonwealth, she has lived a life that in a level of luxury and decadence that most of us cannot even begin to imagine. Never has she had to worry about where her next meal was coming from, never had the anxiety of wondering if Windsor Castle was going to be repossessed if she didn't keep up her mortgage repayments, and her job has never been on the line if she didn't perform adequately in the way that many of us have had to contend with. So automatic respect for the Queen has never really been a thing, despite it being a kind of necessity for the very survival of the monarchy. No, I think it's true to say the Queen has earned her respect. Despite all her obvious privileges, she has dedicated herself to the role. She married the right man, produced 4 children, and her behaviour, for all of her 7 decades in the job, can only be described as exemplary. As head of state, she has counselled 13 prime ministers, including Winston Churchill. She has hosted official visits with such disparate characters as the Polish electrician-cum-president Lech Wałęsa, Mikhail Gorbachev, the Obamas, and even managed to charm the charmless Donald Trump. Now that's quite an achievement, and she, if historical texts are to be believed, even prevented a coup d'etat in Britain in the 70s. And therein lies the monarchy's problem in many people's eyes. People respect the monarchy because they respect the Queen. She's hardly put a foot wrong in 70 years. But now she's 96 years old. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, managed 101 years before she died. If we're lucky, if you're a monarchist that is, she might manage to reach 100 years old, and there will be celebrations again, and maybe even another extra day off. And if we're really lucky, she'll manage another year, by which time she will have been on the throne for 3/4 of a century. But she can't last forever, and when she does finally rattle off this mortal coil, the torch will be passed to the 73-year-old Prince of Wales, who will become King Charles III. And that is an entirely different matter. Now, somewhat unfashionably, I've always been a bit of a supporter of Charles, but it's obvious that I'm in the minority here. No change there then. But it's not so much that I've been an admirer, more that I've recognised that he, like his mother, is as much a victim of what he was born into, and I often think that people don't give him enough leeway for that. As we all know, he is far from perfect, and his conduct cannot even approach the dedication to duty shown by the Queen. But it is somewhat ridiculous that one of the severest criticisms levelled at him is that he is entitled. Of course he's entitled. He's almost the very definition of what entitled actually means. He was entitled the very moment he was born, and that's hardly his fault. He is the epitome of privilege, but having never chosen the life he was given, he is also a victim to it. How many of us can truthfully say that we wouldn't be as compromised if we were in his astonishingly expensive shoes? But many of the criticisms were valid. He did cheat on his wife, his young and innocent wife, and he probably should have known better. And this is of course the basis for most of his unpopularity. People idolised Diana, believing she could do no wrong, and consequently blamed the rest of the royal family, and Charles in particular, for the failure of the marriage and ultimately for her tragic and shocking end. I was never much of a fan of Diana, tending towards Christopher Hitchens's funny and in the end rather cruel comparison with the landmine she campaigned against. I believed her to be manipulative, a skill she certainly honed once she emerged from the sexually innocent bride she was in 1981. My criticism of Charles is just one of a kind of moral cowardice in not boldly insisting that he wouldn't marry a woman he didn't love. But then I suppose it would have been presented at the time as his duty, as twisted as that now seems. After all, the last time a royal insisted on marrying for love and not duty was when Edward VIII was forced to abdicate to marry Mrs. Simpson, and look how that turned out. But whilst Charles certainly has some moral shortcomings, he has committed a great deal of effort to his charitable activities like the Prince's Trust, which really has improved the lives of many thousands of young people who might not have got a leg up elsewhere. And he has involved himself in things that many agree with, like architecture, to the hilarious annoyance of the brutalist concrete and steel purveyors, and also, up until recently, sensible and moderate concerns about the environment. But those concerns about the environment, in which he quite reasonably urged us all to be mindful of this precious planet we all call home, have recently turned into something else, something harder, darker and more authoritarian. He seems to have been deliberately targeted and groomed by the current bogeyman on our side of the aisle, the creepy Bond villain Klaus Schwab, to fall in with the World Economic Forum solution, which amounts to more vaccines, more money and power to Bill Gates, the handing over of all our independence and sovereignty to the World Health Organization, and more and more and more and yet more surveillance. Surveillance that they, judging by the security cordon around Davos last week, will of course not be subjected to. Surveillance is for us, not for them. Now, this dalliance with Schwab is not something I was expecting, believing that in some sort of vague, nebulous way that Charles and his mother believed in the values of freedom and democracy. I'm not really quite sure why I believe that, other than the feeling that if I was in their position, with nothing urgent to spend my time on, I suppose I might like to believe that I was the king of a happy kingdom. I certainly wouldn't be thinking that it was desirable that I was presiding over a swarming mass of humanity that resented me and, given the chance, would rather separate my head from my body. I think that that would make me quite anxious, if not to say just unhappy. Maybe this is a fatal naivety on my part. It's the same thought process that prevents me from understanding the mindset of the tin-pot third world dictator. Why, I often wondered, can't they be content with being a mere millionaire and be loved by their people, rather than wanting to be a billionaire and having everyone hate them? Maybe that's because I don't know what real power does to someone, and maybe how utterly intoxicating it is. Orwell talked about it in 1984, But even though I understood it intellectually, I was always grasping to feel it in a visceral way. And I suppose what I was believing in was the last vestiges of the idea of the benign state, the idea that those that seek power to preside over us do so with a solemn sense of duty. And nowhere is that sense of duty more explicitly expressed than in the idea of the monarchy. These people, assigned since birth and above the messy fray of party politics, and therefore free from the need to be fashionably popular in every opinion poll, are imbued with a sense of destiny that precludes any notion of ambition or advancement. I know it's idealistic, but that doesn't mean it has to be untrue. They are already at the top of the tree, so they might just as well behave honourably, and is one of the reasons why I've thought that having an elected head of state, like a president, is not necessarily better, despite it seeming more logical, more democratic, and just more, well, just. It could and can be better, but it usually isn't. Unifying monarchs rarely become the compromise figures that an up for re-election president so often is. So I suppose, in essence, that is the basis for my support for the monarchy. Having a head of state that none of us voted for can paradoxically be a unifying thing. None of us voted for her, but we all got her just the same. But, and as usual, it is a big but. Having a monarchy must have some benefit to us, something other than its supposed unifying effects. The monarch must be able to counter the most excessive actions of the executive, the government of the day. Starkly and bluntly put, the monarch must be able to protect us, when necessary, from our own government. And for all the Queen's undoubted virtues, if she can't do that, then what use is she? For the benefit of my foreign viewers, there is a tradition here of the Queen's Speech, which is an address to the Houses of Parliament outlining the current government's plans for the coming parliamentary session. I used to think that it was a sort of chat with the nation, but I was getting it confused with her Christmas message, which is just that. But the Queen's Speech is basically her reciting the political manifesto of the incumbent party. And this is the task that she has to perform as part of the constitutional settlement, and it effectively reduces her to the status of a mouthpiece for the government. So whatever tyrannical or authoritarian plans the government has in store for us, she repeats it, thereby giving it a legitimacy it may not otherwise have. And again, if I was in her shoes, what would I think about being wheeled out to announce laws and policy, some of which were right, but some of which that I knew to be wrong? What would I think about that? Well, what I'd think was that I wouldn't want to do it. And then I suppose I would think about all the things I'd lose if I did speak out or refuse to support them. I'm no expert on the unwritten British Constitution, but as I understand it, if the monarch places herself in direct opposition to the democratically elected government, she would have to abdicate the following day. Now, the Queen and the royal family have money in their own right, so it's not as if she would suddenly be in the poorhouse. But along with her losing her status, she would, I imagine, lose all those palaces that are technically owned by the taxpayer, along with much of her staff and all of her numerous bodyguards. So that got me thinking, is there anything at all, that will cause her to forfeit all the trappings of monarchy in order to stand on the point of principle? Is there anything too cruel or too murderous that the British government might do that the Queen just couldn't support? In the absence of any evidence, this is impossible to answer, although the uncomfortable impression is that the answer is no. The thing that is pertinent here is that the Queen has not so much done her duty, but that she has fulfilled her obligations, as per the constitutional settlement, which prevents her from getting involved in the political process. And so long as she abides by that, she gets to remain Queen. So it seems that so long as she never does anything of any substance, she stays where she is. So again, whilst I understand the benefits of a unifying and non-political figurehead, If she has no power at all, and specifically no power to protect us, then what really is the point? It certainly gives the impression, an impression that most of us, myself included, have hitherto preferred to ignore, that despite the obvious support she has, in the end, she's not really on our side. Like most rich and privileged people, she is, and I hate to say it, on her own side. And like mother, like son, Charles's concern for the environment probably is genuine, but it does seem as if he has been deliberately targeted by Klaus Schwab, because Schwab is keenly aware of the esteem that the monarchy is held in, because as we all know, Schwab has made no secret of the fact that he has recruited influential figures in politics, business, science, entertainment and religion. Royal families would certainly be within that remit, since they straddle both politics and religion, and in the case of the sub-Kardashian Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, also a kind of entertainment. To be as generous as possible, perhaps Charles is being naive in believing the WEF's worst case scenario about the environment, and that their solution is for all of us to have less in both material and rights, whilst they continue to avoid the inconvenience of traffic jams and queuing up at the airport. Perhaps he is naive. But Charles is no fool, so it's probably more likely that cementing his own position in the billionaire class easily trumps any notion of concern for the environment, no matter how genuine, when he talks of using the COVID authoritarianism as a rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to deny us of all the benefits of living in a free and prosperous society. Although I'm sure that he is not the dismissive and arrogant monster that some make him out to be, he is hardly Shakespeare's Henry V. The days of kings leading us into battle against the enemies of England are long gone. His primary concern will be himself and his family. In that respect he is a little different from the rest of us. But there is a difference, a small but nevertheless a significant one. He has the wherewithal to secure his family's wealthy and decadent future, as he probably sees it, only by denying us ours. We, however, the little people, by securing our family's future to be able to live in a free society, in doing so, automatically secure a future for others. That's why our cause is noble, and theirs isn't. But as the Platinum Jubilee plays out this week and I drive through my beloved green and pleasant land, my feeling is that I will be unable to resist the street parties and the feel-good patriotism, all decked out in a sea of red, white and blue, despite everything I've just said. Even as I acknowledge the ultimate emptiness of it all, that feeling that when push comes to shove, the royal family will not in the end sacrifice for us, and that the Queen will prefer to keep her palaces and Charles keep his Aston Martin and his duchy in Cornwall, and that they will both prefer to keep their taxpayer-funded flights in a Royal Air Force helicopter rather than make sacrifices for their subjects. They will do their duty, and no more. They will look after their own, and despite the propaganda, their own is definitely not us. So I'll go along, and I'll wave my plastic Chinese-made Union Jack, sing God Save the Queen, and I'll try not to think that she presided over her kingdom becoming within a hair's breadth of a totalitarian state and that she did nothing whatsoever to prevent it. I'll try not to think that her son and heir apparent seems quite prepared to side with the billionaires of the World Economic Forum over the economic welfare of his own subjects. And I'll instead try to acknowledge the dutifulness of a very old lady and imagine that, in a just world, she might actually feel a sense of responsibility towards us. And I'll wave my flag along with everyone else and try not to think too deeply about the lie that I'm participating in. But that won't last for long. It won't last long at all.